The grand oak doors of the courtroom swung open with a heavy creak that echoed through the cavernous space. All eyes immediately snapped toward the source of the sound. A boy appeared. He was no taller than the witness stand, and his suit swallowed him whole. The navy blue blazer was clearly borrowed from an adult, the sleeves hanging past his wrists and the jacket's shoulders drooping awkwardly. A striped tie, tied too loosely around his neck, barely touched the top button of his crisp white shirt. His black shoes, though polished, were too big and clicked nervously on the gleaming marble floor. The boy's name was Noah Harper, and at 13 years old, he was about to stand alone before a courtroom full of skeptics, cynics, and powerful people who doubted his place there. Whispers fluttered through the crowd like dry leaves. Is that the kid representing the plaintiff? A child? This must be some kind of joke. How can anyone take this seriously? Noah's heartbeat thundered in his chest, but his face was calm, determined. Clutching a battered brown leather briefcase in one hand, he walked steadily past rows of dark wooden benches filled with spectators. He passed a gallery of reporters snapping photos, their lenses trained on him like predatory eyes. At the front of the room sat the defendant, Richard Langston, a man whose name was known in every business circle and whose fortune was rumored to be in the billions. Langston's tailored charcoal suit fit perfectly, his crisp white shirt and red silk tie radiating power and control. He reclined in his chair with a smirk, like a king surveying a petty court jester. Beside Langston was his legal counsel, Edward Palmer, a man whose reputation for ruthlessness was legendary. Palmer's icy gray suit was impeccably tailored, his silver cufflinks glinted under the courtroom lights as he adjusted his tie and watched Noah with a mix of amusement and condescension. At the bench sat Judge Evelyn Reynolds, a woman with sharp eyes magnified behind thick glasses, her white hair pulled back into a tight bun. Her presence commanded respect and quiet, but even she seemed surprised by the boy in the oversized suit. The murmurs faded as Judge Reynolds raised her gavel. "This court is now in session," she said, her voice steady and firm. "We are here to hear case number 3049, Harper vs. Langston Enterprises." She paused and then directed her gaze toward Noah. "Mr. Harper, are you here to represent yourself today?" Noah stepped forward, swallowed hard, and nodded. His voice cracked slightly but carried enough strength to fill the room. "Yes, Your Honor." Another wave of whispers broke out, some doubtful, others openly mocking. Judge Reynolds held up her hand. "This is not a school debate," she said sharply. "This is a courtroom. You will be held to the standards of legal procedure and decorum. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor," Noah replied firmly. The room was unnervingly quiet after Noah's opening words. The judge gave a short nod before glancing at Palmer. "Mr. Palmer, you may proceed with your first witness." Palmer stood, buttoned his jacket, and spoke with his usual fluidity. "Your Honor, the defense calls Mr. David Riley, head of compliance at Langston Enterprises." A door opened, and a neatly dressed man with graying temples and nervous eyes entered the courtroom. He was sworn in and took his seat at the witness stand. Riley avoided eye contact with the crowd, especially with Noah. Palmer approached with the grace of a veteran performer. "Mr. Riley, how long have you worked at Langston Enterprises?" 17 years, sir." "And in that time, has your department ever found evidence of financial misconduct?" "No, sir. We regularly conduct audits. Everything has always been in compliance." Palmer gave the jury a meaningful glance before continuing. "Did you ever receive any concerns or complaints from Ms. Lauren Harper?" "She mentioned confusion about a line item once, but after our meeting, the matter was resolved. She signed off." Noah scribbled something furiously in his notebook, his brow furrowed. Palmer paced slowly. "In your professional opinion, Mr. Riley, is there any merit to the claims being made by the plaintiff or her son?" "None that I can see. Everything was filed correctly. We followed procedure." Palmer turned, smiled faintly, and bowed his head to the judge. "No further questions." Judge Reynolds glanced at Noah. "Mr. Harper, your cross-examination." Noah stood, swallowing the lump in his throat. The gallery leaned forward, uncertain whether to expect disaster or miracle. He approached the witness stand, gripping a paper in his hand. It was wrinkled, dog-eared, and full of pencil markings. "Mr. Riley," Noah began softly, "you said Ms. Harper signed off on your meeting. Do you have that document?" Palmer interjected quickly. "Objection. The plaintiff is asking for documents not entered into evidence." Judge Reynolds considered. "Mr. Harper?" Noah held up the wrinkled paper. "This is an email between Mr. Riley and my mom from the day of the meeting. She writes, quote, you never addressed my concern about the missing $42,000 in the S14 budget code. Until then, I cannot approve the ledger." Murmurs rose in the courtroom. Palmer's jaw tightened. Riley squirmed in the chair. "That was a misunderstanding." Noah's voice gained strength. "Was it? Because the ledger was approved the next day without her signature, and her access to the system was removed. Do you know who authorized that?" Riley blinked. That would have come from above my level." "Would that be Mr. Langston?" Noah asked pointedly. Palmer stood. "Objection, speculative." "Sustained," the judge replied. Noah turned slightly. "No further questions, for now." He returned to his seat, but the courtroom was no longer amused by the boy. Whispers turned from mockery to concern. Noah hadn't just held his own, he had created doubt. Outside the courtroom windows, gray clouds gathered. Inside, pressure was building. Judge Reynolds turned back to Palmer. "Next witness?" Palmer rose, this time less eager. "The defense calls Ms. Kendra Mallory, senior accountant at Langston Enterprises." A sharp-featured woman in a sleek suit stepped forward. Her expression was composed but guarded. As she was sworn in, Noah watched her intently. He recognized her name from his mother's notes. Palmer began. "Ms. Mallory, you worked alongside Ms. Harper, correct?" "Yes. For almost 5 years." "Did you observe any erratic behavior or personal grievances during that time?" "She was professional, but she became obsessed with one of the housing projects. She thought something was wrong with the numbers, but no one else could verify her claim." Palmer nodded. "To your knowledge, was any fraud or misreporting discovered?" "No, sir." "Thank you. No further questions." Judge Reynolds looked to Noah again. "Mr. Harper?" Noah stood slowly. He clutched a copy of a spreadsheet in his trembling hands. "Ms. Mallory," he began. "Can you confirm this report is from the Roseview Development Project?" She glanced at it. "Yes." "And what's unusual about this particular month's budget?" "I'm not sure what you mean." Noah took a breath. "The utilities expense jumps from $3,800 to $29,400 in a single month. That's over a 700% increase. Can you explain why?" Mallory's face stiffened. "There may have been a clerical error. Or," Noah said calmly, "someone funneled the excess into a dummy vendor account, like Traceline Consulting, which doesn't exist in the contractor database." "Did you approve this entry?" Palmer rose. "Objection, unverified assumption." Judge Reynolds looked at Noah. "Can you produce supporting evidence?" "Yes, Your Honor," he said, reaching into his briefcase. "My mother printed these vendor records before her access was revoked." He handed the sheet to the bailiff, who delivered it to the judge. Mallory's lips tightened. The judge examined it carefully, then glanced up. "This vendor is not listed in the official registry." "Ms. Mallory?" Mallory hesitated, then finally said, "I don't recall entering that line item." Noah took a step closer. "But your name is on the approval field." "So who did?" Mallory said nothing. The room tensed. The first real fracture had appeared in Langston's pristine armor. As Noah returned to his seat, a strange energy filled the room. It wasn't just surprise anymore, it was respect. From the benches, reporters furiously scribbled notes. The judge looked down at the boy with something resembling curiosity. Even Palmer's expression, for the first time, betrayed the faintest flicker of concern. Langston, however, remained stone still, arms crossed. The judge tapped her gavel lightly. "We'll break for a short recess. Court resumes in 15 minutes. The crowd buzzed with speculation as everyone began to rise. Noah sat back down heavily. He exhaled deeply, glancing toward his mother, who smiled faintly through tears. Noah stood still, his fingers gently tracing the top edge of the plaintiff's table. The judge's gavel hadn't dropped in over 10 minutes, and the room, once buzzing with cynical murmurs and forced chuckles, was now listening, truly listening. Noah's small voice had risen just enough to command attention, and though his hands trembled slightly, his eyes remained locked on Edward Palmer. "Your Honor," he continued, "Langston Realty promised my mother a 5-year lease with a fixed rate. But in the 3rd year, they raised it by 40%, citing a clause that doesn't even exist in the signed version of the agreement." He slid a laminated copy of the lease toward the judge. "I've compared it with the version their attorney submitted. The language is different." A rustle moved through the courtroom. Even Palmer blinked. Judge Reynolds leaned forward. "You're saying the document submitted by the defense was altered?" "Yes, Your Honor," Noah said without flinching. Page 4, paragraph 6b. "In the copy I have from our records, it ends with a rent freeze clause. In theirs, there's a sentence added allowing annual increases based on market recalibration. That line isn't in the original." Palmer stood abruptly. "Your Honor, this is speculation. The boy doesn't have credentials to authenticate documents." Judge Reynolds raised his hand. "Sit down, Mr. Palmer. I'll make that determination." Noah pulled a small USB stick from his briefcase. "If the court allows, I have a PDF backup of the original signed lease that my mom emailed to herself the day it was signed. It includes the email timestamp." He handed it to the clerk. A hush fell again. Palmer's jaw tensed. He leaned over to Langston and whispered something. Langston's cocky expression faltered. Judge Reynolds tapped his gavel once. "This will be reviewed and verified. But I must admit, Mr. Harper, that's a remarkable bit of preparation." A woman in the gallery whispered to her neighbor, "This kid's like a mini Atticus Finch." Noah heard it but didn't react. Instead, he turned to the jury. "You don't have to take my word for it. Just look at what happened to us. My mom didn't just lose her shop, she lost her health. She lost her community. She cried for days. I saw it all. It's not just about money. It's about what they took when they thought no one would fight back." Palmer rose again. "Objection. Emotional manipulation." Noah stepped back respectfully. "I'll withdraw that if necessary, Your Honor." The judge didn't object. He looked to Palmer. "Noah, this isn't TV court. You're doing fine. Stay focused." Palmer sank into his seat with a smirk, but it didn't hold the same power it had 20 minutes ago. The court was no longer laughing. Judge Reynolds tapped his pen against the wooden armrest. "Mr. Palmer," he said slowly, "do you or your client deny that the leasing entity changed without written notice?" Palmer hesitated. Langston whispered something again, but this time it was less a command and more a plea. Palmer stood. "Your Honor, we'll need to review the records before responding to that question." Reynolds nodded. "Then we'll take a recess. 15 minutes. The gavel dropped. And for the first time since the trial began, it was the defense table that looked uncertain. Noah sat back down, exhaled deeply, and opened a water bottle. He had held the courtroom in his hand for a full hour, and didn't drop it. As the recess concluded, Noah returned to his seat. His legs felt like jelly, but the adrenaline kept him standing. He had presented the evidence clearly, his mother's records, emails, and the doctored lease, but he knew there was more to do. The pieces were in place. He just had to finish the puzzle. In the gallery, Noah's mother wiped away tears, unable to contain her emotions any longer. The jurors who had once scoffed at him now looked at him with something else, respect. A few even nodded silently, as if to say, "We see you now." Palmer, who had been quiet during the break, now stood and walked over to Langston. He whispered something into his ear, a quick, sharp conversation. Langston's face was unreadable as he nodded. It wasn't the confident smirk he'd entered with, it was something more akin to a grimace. The judge's gavel echoed in the room. "We will resume," Judge Reynolds said, her voice cutting through the tense atmosphere. "Mr. Palmer, your next witness." Palmer cleared his throat, standing and brushing his suit jacket with an almost theatrical motion. "The defense calls Mr. Richard Langston to the stand." Noah's heart skipped a beat. He had been expecting this, Langston, the man behind all of it, the one who had manipulated and lied. The one whose actions had caused his family so much pain. Langston stood with the same air of confidence, walking slowly to the witness stand. He was immaculate in his tailored suit, his every step measured, but the tension was unmistakable. The man who had once seemed so untouchable was now stepping into a ring that might not be so easy to escape. He sat down, and Noah could see the nervousness in Langston's eyes for the first time. His polished veneer was beginning to crack. Judge Reynolds motioned for Palmer to proceed. "Mr. Langston," Palmer said smoothly, "would you mind explaining your role in Langston Enterprises and the relationship you had with the plaintiff's mother, Ms. Lauren Harper?" Langston's deep voice echoed through the courtroom as he spoke about his company, his wealth, and his so-called commitment to providing affordable housing. "We've worked with thousands of families over the years," Langston said, his eyes scanning the room as he tried to sell his narrative. "I've always believed in what we do. Yes, mistakes were made, but we've corrected them." Noah felt his stomach twist. This was the man who had stolen from his family. "Is that so?" Noah asked, standing from his seat. "You're saying your company made mistakes, but you didn't intentionally mislead investors?" Langston's eyes narrowed, and the faintest tremor in his jaw gave away the tension beneath his calm demeanor. "Of course not," Langston replied firmly, though his voice faltered just a bit. "Any losses were unfortunate, but there was no fraud. There was no intent to deceive." Noah stepped forward, holding a single document in his hand. "I beg to differ," Noah said, voice steady. "I have here an internal memo from your office. It was signed by you, Mr. Langston. It's dated 2 months before my mother was fired, and it states explicitly that you were aware of the fund's insolvency but continued to solicit investments anyway." "That is fraud." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Langston's face paled. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Your Honor, this is preposterous," Palmer shouted, jumping to his feet. "There's no verification of this document. This is a complete fabrication." Noah didn't flinch. He stepped forward, his face calm and determined. "Actually, Mr. Palmer," Noah said, "the document was sent to the office of a former employee who chose to remain anonymous but still provided the copy to us. We've already verified the timestamp and chain of custody." Judge Reynolds looked at the document carefully, and then at Palmer, who was now visibly flustered. Palmer opened his mouth to speak but stopped as the judge raised her hand. "This document will be admitted into evidence," Judge Reynolds said, her voice firm. "The court will review it for authenticity. But for now, Mr. Langston, you're under oath." Langston clenched his fists, his expression tight. The room was silent, waiting for his response. He opened his mouth as if to say something but closed it again, realizing that no words would save him now. Noah's voice broke the silence. "Mr. Langston, you didn't just lie to my mom. You lied to everyone who trusted you. You betrayed your investors, your employees, and most of all, my mother." Noah turned to the jury, his words growing stronger. "My mom didn't ask for much. All she wanted was to secure a future for us. But you took that from her. You used lies and deceit to take everything she worked for." There was no more room for doubt in the courtroom. Langston had been exposed. The calm, confident businessman who had walked in with a smile was now the one in the hot seat, cornered by a 13-year-old boy who refused to back down. Judge Reynolds looked over at Palmer, then back to the jury. "We will recess for the day. The jury will deliberate shortly. Court will reconvene at 9 a.m. tomorrow." The gavel came down with finality. But for Noah, it felt like the end of a battle that had only just begun. Noah stood tall, the weight of the room now on his shoulders. He wasn't just fighting for his mother anymore. He was fighting for everyone who had ever been deceived, manipulated, and silenced. Tomorrow, the final verdict would come. But for now, Noah Harper had already won the first round. The following morning came too soon, and Noah barely slept. The weight of the trial still clung to him like a shadow. They were back in the courtroom by 9 a.m., the air thick with anticipation. The trial was at a crossroads. Today, the jury would deliberate and eventually deliver their verdict. Noah's stomach was tight as he entered the courtroom once more. His hands were clammy, and his throat dry, but his eyes were clear. He had done everything he could. The rest was up to the jury. The courtroom was filled with the same faces, journalists scribbling furiously, lawyers whispering behind their desks, and Richard Langston, who sat stiffly in his chair, his face pale. Palmer sat beside him, his usually smooth demeanor now strained. Noah walked to the plaintiff's table with his mother, his steps heavy, each one echoing in the silence of the courtroom. He felt like he was walking into battle all over again. Judge Reynolds entered the room, her robes flowing behind her as she took her seat. The room fell silent. "Court is now in session," she announced. "Today, the jury will deliberate and present its verdict. We will hear closing statements before the deliberation begins." Palmer stood first, his voice cool and collected as ever. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Palmer said, his tone confident but slightly forced. "What we have here is not fraud. There was no intention to deceive, no conspiracy to mislead. The plaintiff has made a number of emotional claims, but no real evidence of criminal activity. We ask that you look at the facts, and the facts show that there was no crime committed. Richard Langston is an honest businessman who has built this company from the ground up, and I ask you to find him not guilty." He turned and gave a brief, almost sympathetic look at Noah, as though offering a final bow to his opponent. The jury seemed unmoved by his words, their eyes focused on the evidence presented in the past days. Then it was Noah's turn. He stood up slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the eyes of the jury on him, familiar now, almost comforting in their silence. But the moment his feet hit the floor, something changed. He wasn't just the 13-year-old boy who had wandered into the courtroom a few days ago, lost and unsure. No, today, he was more. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Noah began, his voice clear and steady. "You've heard a lot from Mr. Palmer. You've heard the story that Mr. Langston wants you to believe. But I'm not here to tell you a story. I'm here to tell you the truth." He walked over to the evidence table and placed his hand on the stack of documents, the ones that had been gathered with such care, the ones that had exposed the web of lies. "You've seen the evidence. The documents. The emails. The false leases. The companies that Mr. Langston used to hide the truth. The shell companies. The way they lied to my mom and the other investors. The way they stole from people who trusted them." Noah turned to face the jury, his heart beating faster now, but his voice unshaken. "Every person who walked into this courtroom trusted Richard Langston. My mom trusted him. She worked for him, worked with him, and she believed him. And she wasn't the only one. There are people out there who are afraid to speak up because they're afraid of losing everything. But I'm not afraid." Noah's gaze swept over the jury. "I'm standing here today because I refuse to let people like Mr. Langston take what doesn't belong to them. I don't care if you're a child or an adult. When the truth is on your side, you fight for it. I'm asking you to fight with me, to stand for what's right." There was a long pause. He could feel his words hanging in the air, reaching into the hearts of the jurors. He knew they weren't just listening. They were thinking. They were deciding. He turned to the judge. "Thank you, Your Honor. And thank you, members of the jury." Noah returned to his seat beside his mother, who was now holding his hand tightly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Noah squeezed her hand back, his eyes not leaving the jury. He didn't know how it would end, but for the first time, he truly believed that the truth had been heard. The verdict. The jury deliberated for what felt like an eternity. The courtroom was quiet, the air thick with the weight of expectation. Noah sat with his mother, their hands clasped together, waiting. The minutes stretched into hours, and each passing second felt like a lifetime. Finally, the door to the jury room opened, and the foreman stepped out, holding a piece of paper. The room held its breath. Judge Reynolds stood as the foreman approached the bench. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" she asked. The foreman nodded. "We have, Your Honor." The room was still. Noah's heart raced in his chest. This was it. The foreman handed the paper to the judge. She scanned it quickly before nodding. "In the matter of Harper versus Langston Enterprises, we, the jury, find the defendant, Richard Langston, guilty on all counts." Noah's breath caught in his throat. His eyes flickered to his mother, who had tears streaming down her face. She pulled him into an embrace, holding him as if she would never let go. The courtroom erupted into murmurs, but Noah didn't hear any of it. All he could hear was his heartbeat and his mother's sobs of relief and joy. The gavel came down with a finality that echoed through the courtroom, marking the end of an era. The defendant, Richard Langston, sat motionless as the judge's words reverberated in the still air. "In the matter of Harper versus Langston Enterprises, we, the jury, find the defendant, Richard Langston, guilty on all counts." Noah's heart stopped for a split second. The room seemed to spin, but he stayed rooted in place, his body still vibrating with the rush of adrenaline. His mother, beside him, collapsed into his arms, tears flowing freely as the reality of the moment began to sink in. They had won. They had fought, and they had won. But for all the relief and joy that surged through him, Noah knew the battle wasn't over. This victory wasn't just about the verdict, it was about everything that had led to this moment, the years of hard work, the sacrifice, and the pain that they had been through to get here. The road ahead was still long. But for now, he allowed himself to feel something that he hadn't felt in a long time, hope. The media had been waiting outside the courthouse ever since the verdict had been read. Cameras flashed as reporters scrambled to get a word from anyone involved in the case. Langston's defense team had already issued a statement, calling the verdict unjust and hinting at plans for an appeal. But Noah didn't care about their words. Today, he was going to speak for himself, for his mother, and for all the people who had been wronged. He stepped into the press room with his mother by his side. The air was thick with tension as reporters turned their attention toward them. Noah could feel their gazes on him, some sympathetic, others skeptical. But he stood tall, his eyes focused and unwavering. A reporter from a local news station raised her hand first. "Mr. Harper, can you tell us how you feel about the verdict?" Noah took a deep breath, his voice steady. "I feel relieved. This wasn't just my fight, it was my mom's fight, and the fight of everyone who trusted Langston Enterprises. Today, we've shown that the truth matters." He paused, glancing over at his mother, who smiled through her tears. "We fought because we had to. My mom worked for Langston for years, doing everything right, only to be lied to and taken advantage of. And today, we made sure the truth was heard. I'm proud of what we did. I'm proud of my mom." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of his words settling in. Then another reporter spoke up. "What's next for you, Mr. Harper? What happens after this victory?" Noah looked at his mother again before responding. "We've won, but we still have a long way to go. This isn't just about the money or the company, it's about making sure that what happened to my mom never happens to anyone else. We'll keep fighting for justice." Another wave of reporters raised their hands, but Noah's mother gently placed her hand on his shoulder, signaling for the press conference to end. It had been long enough. They had said what they needed to say. As they stepped away from the podium, Noah caught sight of the defense team. Palmer stood at the back of the room, glaring at him with the cold, calculating eyes of a man who had just lost everything. Langston was nowhere to be seen. Noah couldn't help but feel a small sense of triumph at that. The man who had spent so long manipulating and deceiving others was now the one left with nothing. The following weeks were filled with meetings and phone calls. Noah, with his mother's support, started reaching out to advocacy groups and legal organizations that helped victims of corporate fraud and exploitation. He spoke to anyone who would listen, sharing his story and offering advice to those who had nowhere else to turn. Despite the heavy burden of the past few weeks, Noah felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just a victim anymore. He was a voice for those who had been silenced by the powerful, the corrupt, and the greedy. In the midst of the chaos, Noah felt like he was finally beginning to understand what it meant to truly fight for something that mattered. It wasn't just about the money, the courtroom, or the headlines. It was about standing up for what was right and making sure that the truth never stayed buried. And for Noah Harper, that was just the beginning.